On Christmas Eve 1985, a man driving down a quiet logging road in rural Washington thought he'd spotted a mannequin dumped in a ditch. When he got closer, he realized it wasn't a mannequin. It was the body of an elderly woman, face down in the cold mud, discarded like trash on the side of the road. A few feet away, he saw a trail of blood, a set of dentures, broken glasses, and the body of an elderly man that looked like it had been dragged through the brush. By the time deputies arrived, one thing was clear. This was not a tragic accident. This was execution-style murder, just hours before Christmas. And the victims were two of the most beloved people in Lewis County, Washington, 81-year-old Ed, or Ed Morin, and his 83-year-old wife, Wilhelmina, or Minnie Maurin. Their brutal deaths would terrify a small community, freeze a family's grief in time, and turn into one of Washington State's most infamous holiday cold cases. It would take nearly 3 decades, dozens of witnesses, and a detective who refused to let go before anyone was finally convicted. This is the sinister Christmas kidnapping of Ed and Minnie Maurin. Ed and Minnie lived what most people in their small rural community would have called a good life. They shared a 120-acre farm along Highway 12 in Ethel, just outside Chehalis, Washington. Minnie had raised her children there with her first husband, who died decades earlier. Later, she married Ed, and he stepped into the role of stepfather and constant presence in a tight-knit family. In their 80s, Ed and Minnie were the kind of couple people pointed to when they talked about good old-fashioned values. They went to church every Sunday. They were active in the local Grange. They hosted card nights, church luncheons, and holiday gatherings. Minnie was known for her warm hospitality. Ed was remembered as gentle and quiet, the steady one. In December 1985, Christmas was a big deal at the Morin home. The tree farm, the decorations, the plans for family gatherings, it all built up to a holiday with kids, grandkids, food, and laughter. On December 19th, Minnie had a church luncheon planned at the house, a yearly tradition she looked forward to. Her daughter Hazel had helped her clean and decorate earlier that week. No one could have imagined that the house those women lovingly prepared would be the last place Ed and Minnie were ever seen alive. The morning of December 19, 1985, was cold and foggy in Lewis County. Around 5:30 a.m., their son Dennis drove past their parents' farmhouse on the way to work. He noticed something odd. All the lights were on. At that hour, his parents were usually still in bed. He mentioned it to his son, but brushed it off. Maybe one of them couldn't sleep. But as the morning went on, more people noticed strange things at the Morin place. Relatives and neighbors saw vehicles they didn't recognize in the driveway. One neighbor spotted a light-colored van near the shed and a man she didn't know standing outside. Another driver saw 2 white men walking along the road, carrying something about 3 feet long wrapped in cloth, something that looked very much like a rifle. Inside the house, Ed and Minnie were supposed to be getting ready for that church luncheon. They should have been bustling around the kitchen, checking recipes, setting out dishes, maybe arguing over silly little things like how much coffee to make. Instead, something else was unfolding, something no one would fully understand for years. Around 9:30 a.m., a teller at Sterling Savings and Loan in Chehalis picked up the phone. On the line was Ed Morin. He wanted to withdraw $8,500 in cash. Not a check, not a transfer, cash. That was a lot of money, especially for an elderly couple living quietly on their farm. The teller, who knew Ed, thought it was strange, but he sounded calm. She even joked with him on the phone. When Ed arrived at the bank later that morning, he told her Minnie was waiting in the car because she wasn't feeling well. He took the cash and left. What the teller couldn't see from inside that bank was what witnesses later described. Ed's green 1969 Chrysler Newport with an older couple in the front seat and a scruffy-looking man sitting in the back. The positioning felt off. One witness, a young man at the time, later said he waved at the Morins as he drove past, but nobody waved back. Instead, he remembered seeing fear on the elderly man's face. That would haunt him for decades. When family members arrived at the Morin house later that day for the luncheon, Ed and Minnie were nowhere to be found. The house looked wrong in that subtle, unsettling way you only notice when you know how things are supposed to be. Lights were on, the TV was left playing, the front door was unlocked. Some things were out of place, as if the couple had been interrupted mid-routine, but there were no signs of a struggle inside. The family did what any family would do. They called around, they worried, they told themselves there must be a reasonable explanation. But as evening turned into night, the worry hardened into dread. Ed and Minnie weren't the kind of people who just left without telling anyone. They valued routine, they valued family, they valued Christmas. The next day, their green 1969 Chrysler Newport turned up in a shopping center parking lot in Chehalis. Inside, officers found bloodstains and the driver's seat pushed farther back than Ed would have needed. The keys were still in the ignition. Now, the alarm bells were deafening. This wasn't just a couple who had wandered off or gotten confused. Something terrible had happened. But police didn't have bodies. They didn't have a crime scene they could fully understand. They had a missing elderly couple, a bloody car, and a question that hung over everything. Who would do this to Ed and Minnie Maurin? The answer, according to prosecutors years later, started with desperation and greed. In the mid-1980s, just a few miles away, two brothers, Rick and John Rife, were living a very different kind of life. Witnesses would later describe them as violent, feared men who dealt drugs and enforced debts in the area. They had a reputation for intimidation, for threats, for being the kind of people you did not cross. According to court documents, about a week before the Morins disappeared, a witness claimed he overheard Rick talking to his brother Greg, better known as John Gregory, at a party. Rick allegedly said they were going to kidnap two elderly people, force them to go to the bank and withdraw money, then kill them with a sawed-off shotgun and get rid of the bodies. At the time, it sounded like horrifying talk. The kind of thing people might half process, then shove out of their minds because it was too disturbing to fully believe. But after December 19, 1985, that conversation would take on a chilling new meaning. Investigators would later say they believed the Rife brothers targeted Ed and Minnie for one simple reason. They thought they had money. The family owned a farm, a Christmas tree operation, and their grown children were involved in logging. In the mind of a desperate, cash-hungry criminal, that was enough to paint a target on the couple's backs. For the Morin family, the nightmare only deepened as days passed with no sign of their parents. Then came Christmas Eve. A man driving down a rural logging road near Adna, just outside Chehalis, saw what he thought was a mannequin lying in a ditch. When he stopped and got closer, the scene snapped into focus. An elderly woman, face down, lifeless. Nearby, scattered in the brush, were her dentures, a comb, glasses, blood. Another body lay a short distance away, as if it had been dragged. It was Ed and Minnie. An autopsy confirmed they'd both been shot with a shotgun. Investigators believed they'd been shot inside their own car, then dragged out and dumped in that ditch like garbage. Christmas in Lewis County turned dark. There were no comforting explanations, no reassuring narratives about random accidents or mistakes. This was deliberate, cold-blooded murder.
The investigation that followed was exhaustive and at times chaotic. Detectives interviewed family members, friends, neighbors, bank employees, anyone who might have seen or heard something that day. They traced the Morins' last moves. They confirmed the bank withdrawal. They collected reports from people who'd seen the green Chrysler with Ed and Minnie in front and a suspicious man in the back seat. They developed a composite sketch after two women reported seeing a man carrying a gun near a local shopping center that same day. The sketch was distributed widely, but it didn't lead to a solid arrest. Behind the scenes, though, investigators had suspects in mind. Very early on, they were looking closely at Rick and John Rife. Witnesses reported seeing them near the Morins' home around the time of the crime. Stories circulated about their threats, their violence, and their involvement in drugs. But there was a problem. No murder weapon. No DNA. No fingerprints. Just stories and fragments of memory. And then, in 1987, the Rife brothers left Washington for Alaska. That physical distance made it even harder to build a case. For years, the case stalled. Imagine being one of Ed and Minnie's children during this time, grieving their parents, reliving the horror of how they were taken, and then waking up every day knowing no one had been held accountable. Their son Dennis made a quiet promise at their funeral, laying his hand on their caskets and vowing he would someday find out who did this. He spent years pushing, hiring private investigators, and even offering a reward for information. But every Christmas, the empty chairs at the table were a reminder that their parents' killers were still out there. That took a toll on more than just the family. The whole community felt it. People who'd once left doors unlocked started double-checking their locks. Rumors about the Rife brothers floated through the local drug scene and back roads, but fear kept many potential witnesses silent. Some said openly later, if you claimed you weren't afraid of the Rifes back then, you were lying. The psychological shadow of the case hung over Lewis County for decades. Things began to shift in the early 1990s. Investigators got a tip that led them to speak with Rick's estranged wife, Robin. By then, the brothers were living in Alaska, but Robin had a story that investigators could not ignore. She told a detective that on the night of the murders, she had dropped Rick and John off about a mile from the Morins' home. The next morning, she said, she was called to pick them up. When she drove to the location, she thought she saw a body, but Rick told John to get her out of there. If true, her account placed the brothers near the dump site at a critical time. But Robin had her own legal issues. She was in prison on drug charges, and prosecutors at the time didn't feel comfortable building a whole case on the word of a jailed addict. She died in 1995, taking whatever else she knew to the grave.
For a while, it looked like the case might never be solved. But detectives didn't fully let go. A cold case investigator, Bruce Kimsey, picked up the file years later. He went through old photographs and had them enhanced and colorized. He tracked down long-ago witnesses, now older, some sick, some finally willing to talk. He tapped into people's memories, asking them to revisit the worst day their community had seen. More stories emerged. Former drug associates testified that everyone in the drug world knew the Riff brothers were responsible for the Morin murders. Some said the brothers had even bragged about using a shotgun and robbing an elderly couple. Others described threats. If you talked, you'd be next. One witness, James Shriver, eventually came forward and said that as a teenager, he'd seen the Morins in their car that morning, with Ed driving, Minnie in the front passenger seat, and Rick in the front with them, John in the back. He remembered waving, and nobody waving back. He remembered the fear in Ed's face.
He also remembered being threatened by the brothers afterward, told that if he talked, they'd kill him and his family. Think about carrying that kind of memory around for decades, knowing you saw something, knowing you were threatened into silence, living with the guilt, the fear, and the years ticking by while an elderly couple's murder sat unresolved. By 2012, 27 years after the crime, Detective Kimsey finally believed he had enough. Witness statements, patterns, timelines, and a mountain of circumstantial evidence all pointed in the same direction. Authorities obtained arrest warrants for both Rick and John Riff. There was just one problem. John was already dead. Investigators discovered he died only about a week before they were ready to move in. Rick, however, was very much alive, living in King Salmon, Alaska. Deputies flew up, knocked on his door, and arrested him for the kidnapping, robbery, and murder of Ed and Minnie Maurin. For the Morin family, that moment was a mix of relief and emotional whiplash. They had waited more than a quarter of a century. Some family members had grown old themselves waiting for justice. In 2013, Rick went on trial in what became one of the most closely watched cases in Lewis County history. Former friends, ex-associates, and long-silent witnesses took the stand. Some were in poor health, some near the end of their lives. They testified about overheard confessions, pre-crime boasts, and the fear the brothers used to control people. Prosecutors argued that Rick and his brother had carried out a calculated plan. Target an elderly couple they believed had money, force them to the bank, take their cash, kill them, so there would be no witnesses. The defense painted a different picture. They emphasized the lack of physical evidence. No murder weapon, no DNA, no fingerprints tying Rick directly to the scene. They suggested that witnesses' memories had been distorted over time and influenced by small-town rumors and repeated retellings. Rick himself maintained his innocence, and his attorney said he felt no remorse because he believed he'd done nothing wrong. In a way, the trial became a battle over memory. Can stories, recollections, and patterns of behavior stacked high enough stand in for the kind of hard forensic evidence we see on TV? Or is that too risky in a system that's supposed to demand proof beyond a reasonable doubt? After a 6-week trial and a day and a half of deliberation, the jury delivered its answer. They found Rick guilty on multiple counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, robbery, and burglary. Later that year, he was sentenced to 103 years in prison, effectively a life sentence. The judge called the murders brutal and heinous. For the Morin family, it wasn't the same as getting Ed and Minnie back. Nothing could give them back the Christmases lost, the birthdays missed, the conversations they never got to have. But it was justice. Late, fragile, imperfect, but still justice. An appeals court later upheld the conviction, rejecting arguments that the evidence was too weak or the witnesses too unreliable. And so, nearly 30 years after a quiet elderly couple disappeared from their farmhouse just days before Christmas, the case that had haunted Lewis County finally had a legal resolution. The story has since been featured on shows like Cold Case Files and Homicide for the Holidays, turning a local nightmare into a cautionary tale watched by millions. But beyond the television episodes and headlines, there's something deeper here. It's about how greed can push people to view human lives as just obstacles between them and money. It's about how fear can silence an entire community for years. It's about how memory, imperfect, messy, fragile memory, can still bring some measure of justice when technology can't. And it's about a son who laid his hand on his parents' coffins and made a promise, then spent decades helping investigators keep this case alive until that promise was finally fulfilled. So, what do you think? Do you believe the jury got it right, even without DNA or a recovered murder weapon? Would you feel comfortable convicting someone largely based on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence nearly 30 years after the fact? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If this story gripped you, if you want more deep dive true crime cases, especially cold cases, holiday crimes, and stories where justice comes decades late, make sure you hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. And if there's a case you want me to cover, a mystery that keeps you up at night, drop it below. This is the story of Ed and Wilhelmina Minnie Maurin, a loving couple taken in the days before Christmas, and a community that refused to forget. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.